Hey, before anything else, let's skip the throat clearing. No, welcome back. No, hit subscribe before we start. You're here because something is happening with Iran and the United States that doesn't add up, and you already sense that. So, let's just get into it. There's an old rule in poker that says, the moment the loudest man at the table goes quiet, that's the moment to be afraid. Not when he's shouting, when he stops. And that's roughly where Washington is right now with Iran. The threats have gotten quieter. The press conferences have gotten shorter. And somehow, that's being reported as progress. It isn't. It's the sound of a government running out of options while trying very hard to look like it isn't. Iran has effectively told the United States it's done waiting on Washington's timeline. Tehran has, through back channels to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan, made a threat that is refreshingly specific for the region. Hit our oil, our power grid, our water systems, our transport network, and we will not respond proportionally. We will respond completely against every fragile little Gulf monarchy sitting across the water from us. Not metaphorically fragile, actually fragile. These are states with enormous wealth and startlingly thin militaries, propped up by American guarantees they can't independently enforce. And the reason the last planned strike didn't happen the way everyone expected is not some noble American restraint. It's that Saudi Arabia looked at the map, did the math, and told Washington, in essence, we are the ones who get hit, and there is nothing you can do fast enough to stop it. That's not diplomacy. That's basic risk assessment from people who understood they were the collateral in someone else's argument. Which puts Donald Trump in a position that, credit where it's due, he seems to actually understand, even if he can't say so publicly. He's on record comparing himself to Herbert Hoover, saying he refuses to be the president, remembered for triggering a global depression, which is, of course, a strange thing to worry about, while several of his own advisors are pushing him toward exactly the kind of action that would guarantee it. Because here's the actual structure of the decision in front of him. There are only 3 doors. Door 1 is full-scale war. Hit everything. Overwhelm the underground facilities. Finish what the first round didn't finish. Door 2 is doing nothing, which sounds sensible until you remember that doing nothing is not politically survivable for a president whose continued grip on the House depends on enormous sums of money that were assembled specifically to destroy anyone who opposes this war. Money that can just as easily be redirected to destroy him the moment he looks insufficiently committed. And Dr. 3, the compromise option, strike a little, then negotiate, has already been tried. It didn't produce a deal. It produced Netanyahu publicly furious that Trump paused at all. So, when you actually map the incentives, Door 2 isn't real. Door 3 has already failed, and everyone with influence over this White House is quietly pushing Trump back toward Door 1. Total war, again. Except this time with considerably less in the tank. And that's the part nobody in the administration wants to say out loud. Because whatever you think of the reporting on America's munitions stockpiles, the underlying math isn't controversial. Depending on who you ask, the country has burned through somewhere between 40 and 80% of certain precision-guided munitions categories in the last engagement alone. Trump naturally went on record insisting the opposite, that stockpiles are massive, that new plants are being built at record pace, that anyone leaking information to the contrary should expect prison time, which is a fascinating position to take about numbers that, according to people who've spent their careers inside the defense industry, were never remotely secret. The actual problem isn't secrecy, it's mobilization. You cannot run a modern precision missile supply chain the way you ran a Sherman tank factory in 1944, because there was a declared war then, and there is not one now. And without formal mobilization, you cannot simply reroute private industry into wartime production on command. Precision munitions aren't assembled on a line the way a Jeep is. They require human hands checking microcircuitry that fails if it's off by fractions, built for exactly one use, and there is no version of build faster that changes that overnight. So if the political pressure wins and Washington goes back through Door 1, the honest assessment from people close to this is brutal in its simplicity. In 3, 4, 6 weeks, the United States will be strategically exactly where it started, except with a great many more Iranians dead, some more Americans dead, and considerably less capacity to do it again. Which raises the only question that actually matters here. What happens after that? Because the moment the stockpile runs dry, threats stop meaning anything. And everyone in the region, especially Tehran, knows it. That's not a hypothetical for later. That's the trajectory right now. And while all of that plays out militarily, there's a second story running underneath it that gets almost no airtime, which is the state of the American economy absorbing the cost of a war that hasn't even been formally declared. The stock market keeps climbing, and the administration keeps pointing at that chart as proof everything is fine, which is precisely the kind of statement that ages badly. In June of 1929, the sitting Treasury Secretary told the country they were living in an era of unbroken prosperity. 4 months later came October. Nobody is claiming this is a perfect parallel. History doesn't repeat that neatly. But the analysts worth actually listening to on interest rates, bonds, and oil are not the ones on television telling you not to worry. They're the ones quietly pointing at the 10-year Treasury yield, sitting close to a level widely regarded as the threshold where debt servicing becomes genuinely unsustainable for the government, rising at the same time as bond yields, which is the specific ugly combination that doesn't resolve itself with a good news cycle. And when the yen needed rescuing recently, the Treasury reportedly used euros rather than dollars to do it, which sounds like a technical footnote until you realize the likely reason. The dollar has been weakening against the euro, so using euros to prop up Japan quietly does double duty, propping up an ally while nudging the dollar stronger against Europe at the same time. Clever. Also, notably, not a solution to anything. It's a patch designed to survive the next financial quarter, not the next financial era. Which brings us to the part of this story that almost nobody in the American press is willing to connect out loud, that the war posture toward Iran is not happening in isolation. It's happening at the exact moment the war in Ukraine is entering a phase that increasingly looks less like a stalemate and more like a collapse, with air defense interceptors running so low that, on at least one recent night, incoming missiles over the capital simply weren't intercepted at all. Not because the system failed, but because there was nothing left to launch. And here's where the Trump administration's fingerprints show up directly. American intelligence has reportedly been supplying the targeting data behind Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russian oil refineries, strikes that have knocked out somewhere close to 40% of Russian refining capacity, which sounds, on its face, like effective pressure. Except the same country supplying that targeting data is, at the same time, buying Russian oil on the open market, which means Washington is simultaneously degrading global refining capacity and quietly participating in the very market it's disrupting, worsening a global energy picture that its own policy helped create. That is not strategy. That is a government pulling in two directions at once and hoping nobody notices the contradiction. And President Zelensky, for his part, appears to have finally read the room, publicly signaling he wants the war concluded by year's end, while simultaneously pushing for more long-range strikes and a fresh sanctions package, which is roughly the negotiating posture of a boxer in the final round against a heavyweight, offering to shake hands while still swinging. It doesn't read as confidence. It reads as someone trying to manage the ending rather than win it. None of this stays contained to Eastern Europe or the Gulf either. It bleeds directly back into the credibility of the American security guarantee itself, the very thing every mid-sized democracy on Earth has built its own defense planning around for 80 years, which is the actual underreported story here. Not, is Iran a threat, or is Russia winning? The story is whether the United States, regardless of who occupies the White House, is still the kind of partner other nations can safely build long-term dependency on. And the honest answer, watching stockpiles thin, watching yields climb, watching a war open in the Gulf while the one in Ukraine quietly falls apart, is that the answer is trending toward no. Which leaves Trump holding three doors that all lead somewhere he doesn't want to go, a domestic financial picture that resembles October more than anyone in his cabinet wants to admit, and a political system so calcified that even the growing appetite for a serious third option has, so far, nowhere real to land. Every historical parallel for this kind of moment, Kasserine in 1943, Vietnam in 1968, shows the same pattern. The competent leadership doesn't emerge until the crisis gets bad enough that the country has no other choice. We're clearly heading toward that point. We are not there yet. And the most unsettling part of watching Washington right now isn't the shouting, it's the quiet. Because the quiet, historically, is never actually peace. It's just the moment right before someone decides what happens next. I'm Marcus Fenn. This is Borderlines. If this kind of read on things is useful to you, you know what to do. But either way, keep watching what they're not saying, because that's usually where the real story is.